Okay, so now we're recording. So yeah, we've been talking for about 40 minutes and just kind of, I guess, riffing on the topic of last week, which was Indigenous Wisdom. And so I'll just try to retrace my steps and you can like fill in. But I sort of started by saying like that it seems like modern culture is on this tall stack and it's quite wobbly. And there's like, in comparison, Indigenous cultures, it seems like they would have like a resiliency or like a firm foundation and a lot more balance. And then you brought up that the resiliency made sense to you, but then you also started to talk about how there's not as much, there's like a threat. You said like since about the late 80s, there's been an increasing pressure from like the modern world crowding out the Indigenous wisdom. Do you want to like go over that again?
Yeah, so in terms of like the indigenous communities or the indigenous world from the beginning, from at least in Mexico, was taken over, right? But they were still able to live within their ways. That's kind of what I mean. So I gave the example of being able to have their own well, and that guaranteed you the access to fresh water the whole time. But modernity has taken over those spaces, and so they are pushing them. And so when that happens, sometimes even they have to jump in without wanting. They have to go into what modernity is, as in paying, utilities or having to get jobs and blah, blah, blah. So
right.
I guess the phrase where, after all that we spoke, the phrase that I said was they have been forced to change prosperity for economy.
Right.
And that is exactly where, because of where they come from and whatever grounding they had, economy doesn't really work for them. And so those groundings for me are like, very wobbly, and as in like modernity is on top of this thing that is like sustaining like that, because they are resilient and strong, but modernity is going like,
Right. Right. And the example that made that more like easier to imagine for me is the idea of marking a site as historic and kind of giving it this government protection. But then, as you said, well, then now it's controlled by the state, and here come all these rules, and now you can't just live your simple life of the practices that have worked for ages, because I sort of read into this, but like the government says, well, you can't have well water, you have to have regulated water, for example, right?
Exactly. And in order, because it's a community that has no government offices and stuff like that, they are forced to go to the cities 2 hours away and have to pay for transportation, blah, 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 all those things. And so it's like, well, yeah, okay, that's cool that we have a certification of historical site, but you haven't come up with jobs, you haven't come up with any of that will help me afford this new type of life. And so it's just as if they said, well, there's your pill of more poverty.
Yeah. The cost of living goes up and the jobs don't get there. And part of putting aside just the fact that people probably don't want to work in tourism. Even if they wanted to, they'd have to learn the modern language, which in your area would be Spanish, right? And so they don't even have that option, really.
Yeah.
So and then
exactly.
And then the idea that got me really excited was that. So the conversation on Saturday was sort of like, what can we take from Indigenous wisdom, or what should we value from them, or something along those lines. And I think implicit in the question was sort of like an us getting from them and bringing back to where we are. But the image that came up as we talked, which I think is a lot more exciting, is if you could instead have people like us who feel maybe that, we would like to migrate to something that's not game a modern world economic system, into something more holistic. And there are these places around who are trying to still live off the land and live in a this more connected way. And so the idea was that you could have people, in theory, you could get these villages or these indigenous cultures to sort of offer to adopt new members in that are game B thinkers, and then the game B thinkers can essentially land there and get all the benefits of healthy food, a known stable community, but also they're able to look out at the bigger world and kind of maybe help push back this intense tide of modernization. And I guess you'd want someone who's good at game B, and of course it's a new thing, so there's not a lot of expert game Bers out there. But just the image that is in my mind, and is like if we can get 20 or 30 Jordan Halls to all move into a culture, and then their daily life is, how do I live meaningfully in the community, which would naturally include protecting the interests of this community.
Exactly.
And so that's pretty exciting. And then just one more thing I'll add to there is, we talked a lot about like conquest last Saturday, and what we want for game B is actually for game B to conquer game A. And so what's really exciting is the idea that you could have these indigenous cultures that kind of start to adopt and accumulate game B thinkers, and that this tide that's kind of encroaching could maybe stop and then maybe be reversed. And that might actually be like the perfect staging ground for game B to push back. And so then we'd have a new kind of, well, colonialism is such a dirty word, but a new kind of conquering where what's being conquered is the game A modern, zero-sum kind of rivalrous dynamic. And what's pushing back is something that's way more firmly grounded onto living, I guess, indigenous cultures. They have this grounding that's being eroded, as you said it. That's why you sort of didn't like the word grounded, but you did like the word resilient, because they're resilient, but their grounding is being eroded. But the game B movement could sort of bulwark, add some stability, add some protection for that, and then push back out, and that could be a nice staging ground in a way.
And interesting enough, I haven't shared this before, but now that you mentioned this, so because it has been going like this now. So we're talking about trying to expand. Interesting enough, that's exactly the way, at least in the Mayan world, before the revolution times, before the 1900s, the way that the Mayan community protected themselves within the jungle to stop the military to coming in was actually exactly like that, in circles. So they would make a periphery, an internal periphery, and then a second periphery, and then a third periphery. So they would go like that, smooth, and the community inside was protected, and the community would come out and like feed and care for the periphery like that. Mm-hmm. And so there was all these layers of protection of the community. Right. So that happened for 50 years. So that's why the Mayans in this country were never conquered. There was never a fight against them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they died for other reasons, blah blah blah. But it's interesting that you say, and so within the way that, and I guess that's why I spoke to Gordon about this when he spoke about efficiency. I'm like, wait a minute, mm-hmm. There's nowhere that you can read about this because this is being passed orally. So that idea of expansion, of protecting, is exactly how I guess those cultures were working. And so if we could be the part that is missing, because as I told you earlier, well, there's people from the communities that they just want to go. They do believe and feel that modernity is the best way, and they want to go. Well, let them. That's their right. We're no one to say not to that. Mm-hmm. But I can come and take over, hopefully, and say, well, I'm your grandfather. I'm your grandchild. Please take me and tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. And then I can give you back whatever helps you empower yourself, whatever you need. But in this process, I think what's more valuable, because of how history has done things, is them telling us what they need from us and what they want to share. That's where how I see things happening in a very respectful and win-win situation, like a win, we all win for this.
Yeah, like a kind of a cultural exchange, I think was the word that we used earlier.
Exactly.
So yeah, if you have people who, and from Alaska, the Alaskan native villages, the kids often they would dream of going to the city, and I think part of that is because they consumed TV, and TV, of course, makes modern life seem like the best. But yeah, go do the sojourn, go do the journey. Um, but I guess the exciting thing for me is that, I don't know, it seems plausible to have the migration go the other way and have people who are tired of modernity maybe be welcomed into these more indigenous cultures. But as we said, one of the challenges is maybe because you'd have to communicate that to the indigenous culture and help them to understand, look, there are people out there that want to come, and not in a tourist consumerist way. They actually are looking for a new home that is meaningful
Exactly.
and lets them connect to their
Exactly.
environment. I mean, that is what I want. I would need internet access personally, but I'm sure there's a village out there somewhere that's pretty indigenous, and I can
They do
hook up
too.
to
They
it.
do too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they do too.
yeah. Um,
And sorry that I'll interrupt, but at the same time, we do have to tell ourselves that we are there not to impose.
right.
So that has to be a very aware move.
Right.
Because right now, these things are happening. So a person, like groups of people are going into communities, and I don't know where I saw this community somewhere in Brazil. I don't know where it's like, oh, nature, indigenous, blah, blah, blah. And they sell, and to buy that piece of land is like, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's like, no. So those things are aspects to consider, I guess.
Yeah, like what intention are you going in there with? And I think, as we discussed earlier, like there are a lot of people out there who go try to help, but they go and try to help with a frame that they don't question, which is the frame of like modernity is best, or maybe Christianity is best. Economic action. You should get an economy. You should start generating power. You should start farming in a Western fashion. It's all good intentions, but of course, good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and so it's not enough to go try to help. And I guess what seems to me exciting about this idea that we've sort of outlined is we can help without bulldozing what they have. We don't need to go in there and change what they are. We could go there and hopefully be welcomed into their home and respect that for what it is, while looking outside and kind of trying to hold back the tide that's destroying this home. So that
Exactly.
seems pretty, it's exciting. Makes me want to go travel around and find a new home.
Please do. That's the idea. And I guess that's why I brought it up. And I was going to say, I had this experience with one woman, and there was this indigenous, well, it was a Mayan, like a festival, 3 days of a lot of knowledge about Mayans and all of that. But it was always about the past, always about the stones, never about the modern life of Mayans. And there was this group of girls that were talking about recovering and saving the indigenous textiles. And there was this conversation of all of us city women, and there was this one Mayan woman at the back, no, two Mayan women at the back, but she was just listening to them, and these girls, oh, but we need to save this and we need to do that,
Yeah.
and I was listening to them and saying, what is she thinking? Because I was looking at her and saying, what is she thinking? And finally, thank God, she said, who are you to save me?
Mm-hmm.
She got up and said, why are you so desperate for saving me? Who told you that I need saving? All I need is you to stop coming here and telling me what to do. I want to dress like this. Let me. Don't judge me as a lesser human being. I want to have my pigs in my farm. Let me. So what they are looking for is self-governance, I think. And I believe conquest and colonization came with that, but was never respected. Self-governance. And if you allow me to say, I think that's what GameB is.
Self-governance. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there. Well, that touches on sovereignty. Sovereignty is self-governance. It's a way you could interpret that word anyway. And yeah. That's great. I should end it here. I have another call.
Okay.
But I'm really glad
Yes,
we recorded
see
that.
Yes.
It's good. I'm excited to share it with the group. Hi group.
Yes. Hi, group. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We'll continue talking. Okay,
Yeah.
Logan.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. We'll continue on
Yes,
this. It's
thank
very
you.
interesting.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
Have a good one.
Okay. Bye.